Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And we got some Meatball going on here. Meatball is more interested right now in grooming herself than, than anything, I think. But there she is. Meatball in action. So today I wanted to talk a bit more about what we've seen from the Player's Handbook, and it comes along with some news, which is that we now have some prices set up for what it would cost if you're stupid enough to want to buy the one D&D core books. Apparently you have early pricing specials. If you're buying the full-blown core books, if you're paying them at regular price, Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, is expecting you to pay a total of $240 for the 3 core books. That's an incredible, ridiculous price level. But they've got a special if you're pre-ordering early, that you pay for all 3 books in advance. You're going to be paying only $180, which sounds like a very big savings. Except, of course, they keep pushing back the dates when these books are coming out, So, you're paying for who knows when. Apparently, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the Player's Handbook is supposedly coming out in September of 2024. And the other books are obviously not coming out until 2025, I guess. So it's pretty wild. It's pretty insane, and you have to wonder who the hell would want to buy these things. And of course, there are going to be people that are going to do it, right? Because there's people that are idiots, people who are completists, there's people who don't know any better, people who think that the game is going to somehow be improved by having a gang of incompetents meddling with the 5e formula. I've already done a video about that. What I actually wanted to talk about, this is all peripheral. The thing I really wanted to get into here is to do with the question of representation in the Player's Handbook. Because you may have noticed, we've already heard about the Mexican orcs. Meatball, watch out with my books there. We've already heard about the Mexican orcs, and we've got the multicultural community of elves and the gay baker dwarves. There's a whole deal there. Hey, watch the books, please. Go a little bit out there. Come on. Yeah, well, you're causing trouble, Meatball. Meatball, you're causing trouble. You're going to knock those books over. What a silly cat. Anyway, these books have a lot of other stuff. Hillary Clinton as a paladin. There's definitely a very politicized element to the artwork in the Player's Handbook. It is clearly designated to send a subliminal, not a very subliminal actually, a very overt political message. You see that none of the races are depicted in a kind of context of heroic fantasy. Instead, they are depicted basically as doing mundane and ordinary things, right? Baking pastries and going out and showing the strong family ties that the Mexican orcs have, and so on and so forth, right? But another thing that's been very noticeable in the art that's been released so far, we don't have a final number as of yet, but there is an incredible amount of depiction of black women in the Player's Handbook, right? And you can say, well, so what, right? Except that it's obviously meant to be something that is there for a messaging purpose. And, it leads you almost to wonder, with the amount that we've seen just so far, if there aren't actually more images of black women in the Player's Handbook than there are actual black women playing Dungeons and Dragons, okay? Because we know the more or less the demographics of gamers, and although gaming has always been diverse right from the very start, right? There have been people of you know, both genders and all races who have played D&D from the 1970s onward. All right, Meatball is heading off to other pastures. There have always been them, right? And that's perfectly fine. Right? There have been depictions of art like from, you know, quite a ways back from the 70s and the 80s of people of color, so to say, in D&D art. And that's fine, right? But when you see a particular representation being hammered in over and over again, you think, well, this has to be for something. But I can tell you what it's not for. It's not for black women, okay? The reason there are all these black women in the player's handbook has nothing to do with actual black women, because very, very few black women, proportionally speaking, play RPGs at all, right? There are somewhat more black men who play than black women. There aren't that many of them either, right? But at least there's definitely more. There's probably an order of magnitude more black men than black women who play D&D. And the real reason, from my point of view, it seems very clear to me, is it's got nothing to do, because the argument that they're trying to make is this classic DEI argument that they've been making for 10 years now, right? Which is that if we make the game more about these particular groups of people, right? These particular affinity groups or whatever you want to call them, if we represent these people there and they feel represented, then they're going to come and play. But we know that's not true, because it's been going on for 10 years now, and that hasn't happened, right? There's been very little significant growth of any kind in the demographics of D&D players, contrary to what some people have claimed. Kyle Brinks has claimed, right? Oh, that it's no longer just white guys in a basement playing. But actually, in terms of any of the real statistics we know, right? You just need to watch. If you ever watch the intro to any of the live streams of Diversity and Dragons, he has there the image of people coming into Gen Con on opening day of Gen Con, and it's like a sea of white guys, right? Like that has always been the core demographic of D&D. And of course, again, there have always been people who don't fit that particular demographic who have played. But this is, again, a case of RPGs being for anyone, but not for everyone. You know, there is nothing that could actually be done in terms of the RPG hobby that will suddenly cause millions of black women to start playing D&D, because it's not something that is of interest to most of them. It's not something of interest to most white people. It's a particular niche hobby that appeals to a certain kind of mindset, and that mindset does not really have very much of anything to do with race. It has something somewhat to do with culture, but it doesn't have anything really in particular to do with race. But the particular mindset ties very much into Western culture, particularly Anglo culture, especially North American culture. It extends to a lesser degree to other kind of European cultures, which is why there are a lot of gamers, obviously, in Europe and in Latin America. There's probably after, Americans, Canadians, and the English, the next largest demographic of people who play RPGs are probably Latinos, right? Because they're very popular in various parts of South America. They're popular in Spain. And then after that, the French, the Italians, the Germans, they all play. Polish people play, and so on and so forth, right? But it has nothing to do with representation, right? It doesn't. They're not playing these games because they're playing some Latino game or something like that. They're playing D&D or Vampire or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, or maybe Doctor Who or who knows, right? But they're playing geek stuff. It is appealing to geeks. And geeks are a kind of a product of Western culture that also exists, it's mainly a product of Anglo-Saxon, the Anglosphere culture, but it exists also to a significant degree in other parts of Western European culture, okay? So the idea that this is done because it's somehow going to get black women to play more D&D is not just patently ridiculous, but at this point disproven, right? So the reason that's happening, Meatball, really, you're just desperate to knock over my books, aren't you, today? The reason that this is happening has nothing to do with black women. It has to do with leftists, particularly white leftists, and I suppose especially white female identifying leftists, as they like to call themselves, because this is for their fifis, right? It makes them feel virtuous that they have a book that depicts, black women in it, even though hardly any black women play D&D, right? It just makes them feel as though that they're being activists or something like that. Like they're doing something special, And there's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong with making games or settings that have non-Western cultural elements. But if you're doing it, again, because it's of interest to gamers. You're not doing it because you think it's going to recruit people who are from some other culture, right? Like, okay, Arrows of Indra, my earliest OSR game, is set in mythic India. It is entirely an Indian-themed setting, an RPG. And in fact, I know that there have been some Indians, at least, who have seen the game, played the game, some of them, and they've generally had a good response to it, right? They like what I did. And that's great, and I'm very happy about that. And most of the ones who have done that, who have given me any kind of feedback on it over the years, have been positive about it. And most of them are people who were already gamers, right? And they were mostly Indians living in the West, right? Or who had lived in the West at some point or whatever, right? But I had at no time was I expecting that suddenly vast numbers of people in the Indian subcontinent were going to start playing Arrows of Indra. Because there really isn't an RPG culture in the Indian subcontinent. And what little of it there is mostly Indian geeks who are doing it because they're part of geek culture, not because they're part of Indian culture, right? And I mean, same thing with Sword and Caravan, right? Huge sections of Sword and Caravan have to do with the region of the Silk Road, the areas of Persia and Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan and all the other stands, and then China, right? And Mongolia and stuff like that. I do not expect that it's going to become a runaway hit among the Mongolian people, because there just isn't an RPG culture in Mongolia, right? And it wasn't really made for that. Now, again, with Sword and Caravan, I tried to make everything as historically and mythologically accurate as possible. But I did that not from the expectation that it was going to recruit a bunch of Mongolian gamers or Turkmenistan gamers or anything like that, And so in my case, the goal there was just to be able to make accurate, detailed, and interesting depictions of these other cultural sources for fantasy, right? And I think I did a very good job. But I was never under any illusion that the majority of people who are going to play it are going to be regular gamers, which the majority of which are going to be white guys, right? And honestly, I think in their heart of hearts, all but the most idiotic of leftists who are currently cheering on the representative depiction of these other groups of demographics in the player's handbook are completely aware of the fact that it does nothing, right? That it is purely and entirely for their own satisfaction, to make themselves feel virtuous, and for them to call normal gamers racist if they point out how stupid this is. And it is stupid, right? Because it's not like, it creates in them this illusion that they are doing some kind of great service to multiculturalism, when in fact it does nothing at all. All right? So this is essentially what I wanted to point out about that. And it's just one other part of what I've already been covering as far as the horrifically ideological use of art in the New Player's Handbook, which will undoubtedly reflect a lot of the change in the writing too, because as we know, like, they are apparently trying to add some extra modular game material that, as I've pointed out in a previous video, is not going to be particularly helpful to the 5e model. It is in fact going to be detrimental to the 5e model because it unnecessarily complicates a system that is designed for casual players to quickly adapt to it, right? And the more you add crap to it, the more complicated it becomes for casual players to ease into it, right? That was the success of 5th edition, is it's an application for casual play, for people to get into it very quickly, not have to have a lot of rules mastery, and that's the benefit. But you can also be sure that a huge part of what they're changing is meant to be ideological changes. We know that changes to alignment have to do with that. A lot of it has to do with destroying the heroic archetype. You know, a lot of it is changing the style of play from heroic adventuring play into this kind of twee, cutesy poo, exploration, non-combat, you know, your life is a hot mess and you're going to wizard prom sort of gaming that they think is in some way more noble than the classical heroic mold of myth, which is the key thing that makes D&D so attractive, right? And I should point out that heroic doesn't necessarily mean, it's heroic in the classical sense. It doesn't mean necessarily that that you're always playing good guys against evil guys, right? You can be in a mythological sense, a heroic character that is also, from our modern context, a morally compromised individual. You know, that could also be part of it. But that there are ideals there of these heroic ideals and the concepts of vice and virtue, you know, and good and bad, right? And that, you know, and mainly it's about doing great deeds, not wandering around a night market to try eating foreign foods, you know, or something like that. So this is the ongoing deconstruction of D&D that's happening. And it's happening in a way that is completely disingenuous, because what they do by putting in all these images of black female characters is to suggest that they own that demographic and that they can speak for this demographic that is almost non-existent in the hobby, that they can claim to be representing a billion black women throughout the world by having put this artwork into this game that none of them will ever play, you know. And that's what makes it so absolutely ridiculous. So if there's in the art alone, there's a good reason not to spend $240 for a new set of an inferior version of D&D, because inevitably it's going to be an inferior version of D&D than 5e itself was, to say nothing of older editions, right? Not when almost any OSR game is going to be considerably cheaper than that, you know. even Sword and Caravan, even if you buy the deluxe edition, right, like the premium hardcover color edition of Baptism of Fire, for example, I think that will cost you for the complete game. It'll cost you under $80, right? And that's if you get like the fanciest version of it. So, you know, don't fall for it. I know that a lot of you, I'm preaching to the choir, but I know that there's some of you there that are going to be like, oh, but I need it, you know, a completeness. I have to have it. It's the new edition. I bought every edition of D&D, but it's just stupid. Don't do it. Don't buy the skin suit of the thing you love that they are trying to kill, you know, because you're only helping them kill it. Now, will it be successful? Who knows? I've seen videos. Apparently, a lot of normie 5e gamers are not very pleased with this in particular, how they've advertised these pre-purchase options, which I guess they're modeling it on video games, which is not surprising given that, you know, most of the execs of Hasbro and Wizards come out of Microsoft, and, you know, they're acting as if it's like an early release video game product, but it's not that. It's a book, right? And it just doesn't make any sense to pay in advance. You know, to pay $180 in advance for a book that might take a year to get to you, And it's just stupid, right? It's just like so extremely stupid. So don't fall for it. There's so many better products that you can get, including the ones you see here, Arrows of Indra, Sword and Caravan, the old school companion one. I also don't pretend that more Europeans are going to buy the old school companion one just because it's based on medieval Europe, right? People are going to buy it because they're interested in authentic medieval fantasy and making their games more authentically medieval, which is fine, right? That's the demographic that D&D appeals to are geeks. It doesn't matter what kind of geeks they are. They could be black female geeks, or certainly some of them. It could be Asian geeks, white geeks, Latino geeks. Race is not really an issue in being a geek, right? Like it's if you're into nerdy stuff, then the rest of that's the only category. None of the rest matters, right? So the idea of trying to make it matter on purpose for the purpose of ideological warfare is patently disgusting. I guess that's everything I had to say. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, share it everywhere that you think people will find it interesting or get pissed off about it. I'm fine with either way. And if you want to support me, you can always send a super thanks or a super chat on my live streams, but the best way to do that is to pick up my products, stuff like Sword and Caravan, Medieval Adventures on the Silk Road, which is a complete campaign setting you can use for any OSR product, though especially, I guess, for Lion and Dragon. Arrows of Indra, which is both a complete RPG and setting. The Old School Companion, which is a bunch of additional and supplementary rules that you can use and other things in there that are going to add a more medieval flavor to your campaign. Check out Baptism of Fire, which has been one of the best-selling OSR games of the year. You're bound to like it, I'm sure, because everybody's been talking about how great it is, and part of that's on me, of course, but part of that is also on the incredible publishing work of Mad Scribe Games. And if you don't have a lot of money, but you still want to pick up some of my products, check out in the links below. I've got links to all of my products, the Pundit Presents, and also now the Pundit Files, which are available only in the Red Room. The latest issue of the Pundit Files is Weird Magical Objects, a collection of 29 weird fantasy magic items that will definitely weird up your campaign a bit, and there's lots of very interesting stuff there, like Bill the Elf's Primo Staff, and the Trident of the Seaman, and the Horn of Gonzo, and the Deck of Heck, and the Hand of Alan Moore, that mighty artifact. So be sure to check all of those out. And if you want the previous issue, number 14, that is the first source book to Baptism of Fire, which is the medieval authentic guide to the city of Poznan, which is it's the second most important city in Greater Poland. It's the commercial capital, and you get a whole detail of everything, like what the city looked like in the 11th century, its neighborhoods, adventure queues, the market town next door, and the mysterious magical oak wood that has unique magical flora and fauna that is just less than a day away from Poznan, with a lot of adventuring potential there. So be sure to check that one out, and check out the current one, and check out the other issues. All of them are only available at the Red Room store, and every single one of them only costs $3.50. So if you can get someone to give you $3.50, you can buy an issue of the Pundit Files. That's everything for today. Currently smoking, or just finished smoking, Lorenzetti Oversize plus Argento Natural.